Received a master's degree in this department in '87, went off to the Peace Corps, came back, got a PhD in '95, again from this department. He's worked everywhere, all right? You name it. He's been a major player there. And he's currently working at Accuray in treatment planning. So Rich is going to talk to us today. Take it away, Rich.
Okay, thanks. So I named this talk Death, Life, and Zen in High Tech, in part because I wanted to bring what I thought was unique to my experience. You know, everybody's gone out and done cool stuff, right? So I thought, well, what's the thing I'd most like to share? And there were these three themes. So I'll go through each of them in turn. It's great to be back here. I got 20 years to cover 20 minutes. Somebody has a talk title with 30 years and 20 minutes. And but it's wonderful to be back. It's great to see Nick and Mary here since they're a big part of this story. So the death part involves working at Third Tech and doing crime scenes and tools for that. The life is about the working everywhere and includes the death of various companies. I don't think I single-handedly killed any one of them, but I can't be sure. I certainly tried to help them succeed. And I have some success stories to share. And then through all this, I have kind of 20 years of looking into mindfulness and meditation and how that has kind of seeped its way into my work life in a way that I didn't personally expect it to, but I think is really cool. So let's start with death. Lars Nyland, with great help from Nick and others in this department, invented something that Third Tech commercialized. And we found its niche as a crime scene scanner because it wasn't a perfect model acquisition tool. The measurements were kind of bumpy, but you could get real camera data and map it to range data and create 3D models of crime scenes. So this is me. There's, no people were harmed in the making of this slide. I actually fell asleep, and this is, I staged it because I knew how slow the delta sphere was at that time to scan, so I thought, well, let me lie somewhere that'll be really comfortable. I did some scans at Nick's house that were less comfortable where I was lying on the floor and I regretted it. So this is me lying on the bed with ketchup that Doug Schiff had smeared on my side as a mock crime scene, and as you can see, it's in 3D. And you're able to take measurements and see parts of it very realistically, and other parts are just plain missing because the laser doesn't pick it up. So through this, as we were developing the product, Nick and Doug were out working with people to get us to real crime scenes. And so there were two that I personally had experience with that were both haunting and fascinating. And I feel like it's important to acknowledge that. It's that thing that makes us slow down when we go near an accident. And it's, there's compassion, and there's horror, and there's, wow, what's that like? And so in one case, we were retained by the Peterson family on the defense side for the Mike Peterson trial to scan a stairwell in which it was alleged that, in which his wife had died, and it was alleged that he had killed her. So it was weird being on the defense side of that. It was weird walking into a house and meeting this person whose name I had seen in the papers. And then they pried this board, or they unscrewed a board that covered that stairwell that had been covered up for months, I believe, by the time we got there. And so there was this feeling of stepping into a surreal environment in kind of a sacred space where this thing had happened, and we're trying to help but having mixed feelings about which side are we on and which side should we be on, and not knowing. So, at the beginning, we're scanning this space and it feels very awkward, but by the end of the day, it was a job, and we were trying to do something useful and to be successful at making that work. And so that was an awkward transition. I realized by the end of the day, I was just sitting on the floor right next to the stairwell working with the data. And it was a It was a job. It was something important that needed to be done and to be done well. And we developed tools, for doing things like, this is not real blood. This is, I looked up online how you make blood, and it involves like water and red food coloring, of course, but cornstarch, I think, was the surprise ingredient. They weren't kidding when they said it's thicker than water, because it is. Another really haunting situation was going to a murder scene, or a shooting scene in Durham on Markham Street. And this, I believe, was drug related, but there were 4 females who were shot, I believe through no fault of their own, in some kind of a gangland assassination. And so I had that, again, that eerie experience of driving up and crossing the police tape and going inside of something that I had only seen on the news. And luckily everyone, I don't know how lucky it is, right? But at least everyone had initially survived the original attack. So it wasn't walking into a scene where there were bodies, but there was blood, and it was really, really weird. And again, it came down to, how do we do our best job to capture the scene in a way that shows the Durham Police Department what we can do, and will help us help others solve crimes in the future. Excuse me. And so as part of that, I worked very hard on a blood spatter analysis tool. Now, when I was here at Citizen working on virtual reality, I didn't expect to be working on this, but it was really cool and it was really strange, because one of the things I worked with was real data. And I had this long weekend, being, 4th of July weekend, and we had to get this done. So I stayed back and I was working alone in the office with real data on a tool that I hoped would be helpful. But it was just all this kind of tangle of emotions and experiences working with this and staying focused on trying to do good in the midst of this human experience. And the fascinating thing was, it wasn't just computer science anymore. It was about human life and the things people do to each other. So that was different. So moving on to life in startups, this scene, I like this as a metaphor for startups. If you've seen The Princess Bride, walking through the fire swamp where geysers of flame just shoot up at random and can just take you out. And then there are, of course, the rodents of unusual size, but that's another story. Lots of things in startups can take you out. So as Gary said, I've kind of worked everywhere. I started in '85 just because I thought the Apple internship was a cool thing that I got to experience, and that came through the department. So I've seen a fair amount of the high-tech world through this traversal. My first job after coming back from Peace Corps, they laid me off after 28 days. They laid off the whole engineering staff. They didn't single me out, so I didn't feel quite as bad. For many of these jobs, I left because they stopped paying me. They shut down the site. So it's not that I'm a job hopper. I'm proud to say that I've been with the group that was Morphormix now for 6 going on 7 years. So I feel like, okay, I've covered that finally. Working with all these different companies on all these different technologies has been an experience of bringing things to life. PixelFlow, developed right here, and then commercialized by Division and later HP, and shut down after a year. This is a Jeep we used to own, which, again, with the Delta Sphere, we were able to make I think, a pretty cool demo of augmented reality in which the video image had the 3D model and superimposed on it, and we were using the highball tracker to make it appear as if it was there in the room if you looked at the monitor. And we set this up at SIGGRAPH, and people would walk by and say, "Where's the Jeep?" Because they'd look on the monitor, they'd see a Jeep in the booth, and where there's data, it's pretty realistic, right? It's photorealistic. So that was cool. And then another story about new life is one day in, I think it was January, after Division or HP had shut down the site, wait, let me get a time check. Is that?
No, you're good.
Okay, yeah, all right, good. I went to what was called 3D Ultrasound Inc. at the time. It was renamed to Volumetrics. And I interviewed for a job there, and they needed a 3D person. And this building was in the Venable Business Center, which is near the Durham prison. and it's rainy and it's 40 degrees, and I was driving that Jeep, which also leaked. So the building was about as good at my Jeep at keeping out the elements. And and I had this interview, and it wasn't one of these hard sell interviews. It was kind of like, do I want to work here? What's this going to be like? And I had a vision, and it looked kind of like that picture of the baby there. I was like, wait a minute. All they display are 2D slices of blobby data, because when you do 3D in ultrasound, the speed of sound is a lot slower than the speed of light. You can't capture as many samples as you'd like. So these were kind of crummy images, to be honest. But they didn't display them at all in 3D. And I thought, wow, I could help make that happen. I could help make a baby's face appear while the transducer's still on the woman's belly. That would be cool. So I got over my aversions and was able, working with Paul Hiltz, who went to this department back in the day, on the hardware side, to create a software and hardware pipeline such that we were able to render this is the actual image of a catheter, and this is the right ventricle, and there's the left ventricle, because it was focused on cardiac visualization. So we were able to actually visualize in 3D using hardware in real time, which was really cool. And then the test engineer turned out to be female and pregnant and willing to be scanned. So one day in the conference room, she consented to be scanned by our person who knows how to do this officially, as opposed to the rest of us who would just plop the transducer on our own chests just to get some data. He was a trained ultrasonographer. And so we saw her son, Andrew, in the womb. And that was that vision come to life. And that was really, really cool. And then there was a long story about the business side of it, in which we basically had the cool $250,000 machine that only the 10 richest kings of Europe could buy. We had that problem, and we needed to partner with somebody to go mainstream, to make it smaller, more full-featured, to handle things like DICOM, which is a medical imaging standard. And so we tried to partner with a number of companies, and Philips Medical said, oh yes, we want to buy you. And then for a year they said, oh yes, we want to buy you. And then finally we pulled the plug, or the investors pulled the plug and stopped paying us. So I got to go and play somewhere else. And it turned out, in the allegations of the lawsuit, that they had been stringing us along while they bought Agilent Medical. So we were their safety policy. The judge didn't like this, and so when we sued them for 60, he trebled the damages to 180 million, and then they settled for half of that. And of course the lawyers got half of that. And so when the remaining employees got something, it was not in the millions, but still it was something. And one of the kind of happy stories of being in high tech was there was an opportunity where they could have said, well, if you want to keep your stock options, you need to buy them now. And they didn't. So they allowed us to ride along with the success of the company and continued to get, got little checks for some period as they sued other companies. So some mixed feelings there. But at any rate, I thought that was a pretty cool thing, that it didn't go to kind of the lower side of human nature. And I think that the first lawsuit was absolutely founded based on what I had seen and experienced. So again, on this side of entrepreneurship, when I was at NVIDIA, ran into Ed Cheney, and Nick had contacted me about how they had something opening up. And I kept saying, well, I think I'm done with startups. But at some point, it just kept lining up. And then it was funny, I was talking to my mother about this job possibility, and she said, well, it sounds perfectly wonderful. Everybody else was saying, no, you don't want to go back and do a startup. And I said, you're right, this is my dream job. Why am I not taking it? So I came on following Lee here as VP of Product Development, and Lee was one of the reasons I joined, to help bring automatic segmentation in the male pelvis to Multiplan with the partner company, Accuray, who eventually bought us. And in a short time period and a lot to cover, I won't try to cover everything, but I think with the theme of entrepreneurship for this session, I think the punchline is we kind of did everything right, and it still took a Hail Mary. We had partnership a partner who invested early. We had grant money. We had Nick as an incubator and as a business, as a stand-in CEO. We had great technology from the university. We hired a great team of people from the university. We did all these things well, and it still took some diving catches, and it took somebody having vision, who's now my boss at Accuray, saying, you know what, we should just buy these guys because the licensing will end up being, more if we don't. And plus we can kind of then tell them what to do. And now he does. And that's just fine. So, in terms of a business lesson, any one thing can kill you. And so we did a lot of things right, and a lot of things worked out well. And we were bought for $5.7 million, which is pretty cool. And I didn't retire on that, but people did make some money on it, and I think it was a great experience, and it continues to be because we're helping fight cancer. 5 minutes? Oh. That clock, okay. Now I get it. Okay, so I will speed up. So I started looking into meditation and mindfulness in 1992 when I realized I was going to graduate from the department. And because I wondered, what more is underneath all this? And so I started to study that, and that led to study of various traditions. And what I found is that there's a study area called mindfulness, which people now use across all different traditions in workplaces and so forth, that help people become more present in their lives and more effective and manage stress, manage pain. And this is completely non-denominational. And so what's been fascinating to me is how it crosses that boundary between personal work life, because as you become more introspective, you understand other people and where they're coming from. You become kind of more peaceful in the way you are in yourself, and people sense that. You're better able to help see when others are stressed about something. And that's why I have a bullet point for fear here, because one of the kind of interesting discoveries was fear is like the thing that nobody talks about. Everybody has fears. I had fear getting up here to talk, right? But it's not something we have much of a dialogue about. But it's like this invisible structure in the universe. Why is so-and-so not doing that? Well, chances are there's a fear around that. And so this whole area of study has been helpful in working with people as a manager, as a colleague, and just with myself in the workplace, and getting myself out of the way, which selflessness is another key teaching of a lot of these traditions. And this gets into the selfless leader. You think of a Marine leading a charge, that's a selfless act, but there are also kinds of selfless acts in leadership in which you try to get yourself out of the way to do greater good. And that points to what I call Gaussians, blurring the boundaries between all the roles so that everybody has a voice in everything according to their sphere of influence, or it's like filters, right? They have a certain region of influence. And what I think happens in healthy organizations is you give everyone a chance to contribute outside of their boundaries according to where they can. And this brings me to my notion of management as curling. In curling, you have this heavy thing, a stone, and you're sending it down the ice, and when someone releases it, there's no one touching it, but I learned last night, 2 people out in front of it. But let's say there's one, and you're not touching the thing. You're furiously racing ahead of it. You're trying to anticipate. You barely get to change anything, but you're somehow removing obstacles and shaping the path so that when it lands there, it looks like it would have gone there anyway. And so what was all the fuss about? And I feel like that's kind of a good model for management. When it lands there, you're like, well, why were you working so hard? It was going there. And you just say, yeah, sure it was. Okay. And so I like to close with my favorite parable. A man is walking in a medieval city, and he comes up on a vast construction site. And he comes up upon a worker, and he says, what are you doing? The man says, it's terrible. My hands are bleeding. These rocks are heavy. I have to carry them up and down these stairs. I just I just hate it. I don't even know what it's for. So he walks to the second person. There are always three. So the second one, he asked, what are you doing? And he says, I'm working. I have a pretty good job. I'm putting a little money away. I can't complain. The work is decent, and I'm taking care of my family. So it comes to, of course, the inevitable third guy, who's so engrossed in his work that he has to tap him on the shoulder and say, what are you doing? And the man looks up and he says, I am building a cathedral. And I love this story because it points to the vision of the big things that we do that are easy to lose sight of. When I'm working on FDA documentation at Accuray, it's not sexy, right? It's a lot like carving stone and lifting stone. But at the end of the day, we fight cancer, and that's really cool. And that's the vision, and that's our cathedral. So, thank you.
All right, questions for Rich? It was all perfectly clear.
I would just like to point out that Rich's illustration of him on the bed is in, I think, 6 different patents. He's the only inventor whose dead body appears
In multiple patents. I love it.
So
What?
You patented over his dead body?
Just killed him working at 13.
Oh, wow. That's fabulous. That's fabulous. For those of you watching the video, Nick pointed out that the picture of Rich's dead body on the bed is in 6 patents. He's probably the only dead inventor presented in patents. Russ.
I'm interested in the statistics of the dead company. And they each died for a different reason, or was there some common thing that was always the case there, or can you not really tell and everybody tells a different story?
So Russ is asking about the statistics of the dead companies. Do they have something in common besides Rich?
I don't think that video's dead.
I think so Autotask, I think Apple's doing okay. I haven't checked in on them in a while. Autotask, they had a round of investment that was supposed to come in any day now, and then it didn't. So they were pretty, maybe a 5-person company. So they had kind of a dubious portfolio of products. So I didn't feel like they were kind of built to fly, but on the other hand, it was cool stuff, and I thought, I don't know anything, I'll give it a shot. And so I learned something there. GTX, I checked last night, is still up and going, and they still look like a kind of a mom and pop outfit. They did drawing recognition, so there's no depth story there. Division took on PixelFlow as a VR company, and you guys may know that story, but it got very big and very expensive, and I remember Durward Rogers with the hardware schedule, and it was always moving out and to the right. And so they had to sell it to HP, and HP had to cancel the project, I think rightly, because workstations were getting eaten by PCs, which were riding Moore's law to faster graphics performance, and we were trying to build the perfect beast on a 5-8 year cycle, whatever it was, and that wasn't going to keep up. Let's see. Volumetrics was the partnering story I already told. Hyphen struggled to figure out what they were really about, and so they got bought and then got shut down. NVIDIA's still there. Morphomics, somewhere in there, Third Tech is still up and going, so there's no death story there. And Morphomics got bought. And Accuray is about 1,000 people and just posted lousy quarterly results, but we're almost profitable. Have you heard that before?
Other questions?
So can you compare what it was like working at Morphomics as a standalone company versus working at, I don't know what you're called, the Chapel Hill office of Accuray, and how did things change when you became part of Accuray as compared to when you were in the little Morphomics?
Yeah. So the question is how things changed going from small standalone Morphomics to part of a bigger thing.
Yeah, great question. And I'd say it's been wonderful, I think, for everybody. But in part because we had enough of being 6 or 7 people in a small office trying to make a go out of this technology, we couldn't grow fast enough, in my opinion. We had grant money to do the thorax autosegmentation, but we had spent quite a lot of energy doing male pelvis autoseg. And so I didn't have this sense that we were going to cover the whole human body with the scale that we were at. And I felt like David, the CEO, did a good job of looking for all the other markets and had kind of run out of ideas. So 2 things happened that could have gone in either direction. We started to get interest from the other biggest player, and then we also started to get the sense that this wasn't necessarily going to go anywhere if that didn't. And so I felt like we had a good ride, and we got out just in time, or we got bought just in time. And so working at Accuray, it's a wonderful culture. I think it's very healthy, and it's nice to have other groups to work with across different sites, and to be part of that bigger picture. I mean, the company makes these, well, we buy German robots that we use to steer radiation with sub-millimeter precision into people's bodies to kill tumors. That's really cool to be part of that bigger picture. So I think it's been good, and Marcus has been great as a boss, and Rob Hill has been great as well.
Can I get Sunil to come up and be setting up? Is Sunil here? I don't see him. That's confusing.
While you're waiting.
Other questions?
One question.
Yes.
On your Zen side, we all have fear, you say, right? And, you know, depending on the world we're living in, if you're shooting basketball hoops or whatever, you expect there to be fear. And sometimes that fear is part of the performance, the elevation, and our expectations, our adrenaline that they perform. But fear in an entrepreneurial, in the top report, we're talking about 42 months, right? We're talking about years, right? How do you use that fear? How do you control that fear? That kind of gnawing fear can keep you awake at night, drive you down. How do you manage it?
Nick wouldn't know anything
So
about
Terry is asking about long-term extended fear. How do you manage it?
I think Nick's a better one to answer that one, but I'll give you, since I'm standing up here, I'll give you my take. That within the group, what we have always strived for, and what I've always kind of communicated, is we want a healthy amount of stress of saying, you know, the wolves are at the door, and if we get complacent, we could fail for non-essential reasons. So there's that healthy version of figuring out, you know, what should we do? What's the highest priority? And don't get sucked into complacency. And then the rest is just kind of breathing through and accepting and doing whatever it is you do to manage the unnecessary, unhealthy fear, the things that you can't control. I don't know if that answers your question.
Come on, set up.